Marin Delaney did not run toward the fire. She ran from it. An inferno that consumed the Delaney homestead with merciless appetite. The night itself seemed to shudder as the flames clawed at the sky, the roar like a freight train in her ears, muffling the single truth she carried with each stumble she could not stay. By the flicker of embers, she saw her own legs bare and bloody, imprinting tracks across the scorched earth. Her dress torn at the hem, slapped against her calves, half of it soaked with the ash that settled like guilt on her skin. She dragged each breath into her lungs with a rasp. It was the smoke, thick as wool, choking her memories and obscuring the stars she might once have taken for solace. She did not know how long she ran. Minutes, hours, time folded onto itself when survival was all that mattered. All she knew was the endless snap of splintered wood behind her, the groan of collapsing rafters, and the distant crack of gunfire, sharp, purposeful. Jeremiah's hired gun. She glanced over her shoulder, almost expected to see the sheriff's badge glinting in the flames. Instead, she glimpsed only a shadow in pursuit, a man breathing malice into the night. He closed in the torchlight, outlining his pistol. Marshaled by Jeremiah's orders, he was determined to drag her back into a life she had already buried beneath dirt and bruises. To make her the gold that lined their pockets, nothing more. She staggered, and for a moment, her vision doubled: two flickering marshals, two threats. She choked and coughed until she tasted ash and fear. The world tilted and she thought, this will be it. But then, from the darkness ahead came the rasp of hoof against dry grass. A silhouette appeared, framed by fire's glow, like some wraith born of nightmares. A man on a horse, moving swift and strange. Cal Jarrett. Not a hero. She would have told you then. He looked like everything you'd expect from those dusty tales that curled from a campfire's edges, but when you caught sight of his eyes, they were threadbare, haunted. Eyes that spoke of long nights, old sorrows and debts he'd never meant to collect. He reined his mount, leaned down, and said nothing. He offered his hand. Marin swallowed fear and doubt and let him pull her up. The horse wheeled, and they bolted. Behind them, fire and vengeance fell away. She did not pass out immediately. Her consciousness clung to the rhythm of Cal's steady arm, the pulse of his horse. The night air inhaled her ragged breaths, sucking away soot and hesitation. She blinked at trees sliding past, pale beneath the reddish glow of the blaze behind them. Then darkness pooled behind her eyes, and she surrendered to it. Flashback. 3 days earlier, Marin Delaney sat stiff and silent among scraps of fabric and notes in the cramped back room of Amity Cho's little tailor shop. Threads crisscrossed the wooden table like spiderwebs. The lamp's glow caught the dust in the air, making the past seem as tangible as the worn spool of thread in her fingers. Amity watched her. The tailor's hands, steady, practiced, rested on a half-finished gown. She said nothing at first. Marin's voice cracked, the words brittle. I can't stay there any longer. Harlan, he won't let me breathe. He treats me as if I'm bound. No promise, no mercy. Amity's eyes were kind, filled with lightning and regret, in equal measure. She rose, set aside the gown, and took Marin's hands in hers, hands small but clenched with something old and rooted. If your inheritance falls into the wrong hands, Amity whispered, the story won't end here. It will loop endless. These people, they build cages out of law. You need to break free before the judge's hammer falls. Marin nodded, though she felt heavier than it sounded. She swallowed the words break free, like they were a lifeline tossed into her chest. And then they stood silent, two women, tethered by memory, fear, and hope, in a dusty Kansas town where the law was always writing in their favor. Return to present. When Marin came to the world was muffled, damp, as a dream just after midnight. She lay in a bed of straw inside a lean-to, lit by a feeble lantern that swung under Cal's steady hand. She blinked. Pain lanced through her leg, and in that pain was the strange gift of life. Easy, Cal murmured in a voice rough as gravel and gentle as dusk. You're safe. She let the words sink in. Safe. She tested them on her tongue, unfamiliar. Below her, the memory of fire still pulsed in her blood. The musky scent of pine and sweat was foreign. The night was distant now beyond the lean-to walls. Her pulse slowed, sinking with the steady hush. She dared a question. Where are we? It came out ragged. Cal's eyes didn't flicker, but they moved slow, thoughtful. You're at my place, he said quietly. My cabin just off Delaney's land. I keep horses. I heard the fire out here. I came. Marin closed her eyes. His words echoed a thought she had never entertained. Help. She thought of Amity's warning of the caged past refusing to stay buried. But maybe, just maybe, this stranger was the door out. Her breath hitched. The lantern sputtered, casting his face into half-light. In that half-light, Marin felt the first brittle bud of trust bud, trembling in her chest. If old stories make your heart slow down for just a beat, then go ahead and hit subscribe. Every subscription is a companion on the trail, a quiet reminder that honest things still deserve to be heard. The next day, Marin woke to the sound of coffee bubbling over. It wasn't the scent that pulled her back into the world, nor the gentle creak of wood under slow, deliberate footsteps. It was the silence that followed. A kind of silence that spoke of restraint, of someone trying not to wake a wounded animal. She opened her eyes. It took a full minute before she remembered where she was. The man, the horse, the fire. Then she saw him, Cal Jarrett, by the stove, stirring the pot with the same focus one might give to mending a broken fence. She watched him silently, trying to place him beyond the silhouette from the fire. Then it struck her, the market. 2 weeks ago, she'd been cornered by a pair of drunken cattlemen behind Rosner's dry goods store. No one stepped in. No one even looked. Except him. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't shout. He just looked long and sharp, and the men backed away, like dogs from a storm. She hadn't thanked him then. She wasn't sure she could now. He turned, saw her awake, and nodded once. You're lucky, he said, voice low. A minute later, and they'd have hauled you back to Delaney's place in a sack. She tried to sit up, winced. I've been worse, she whispered. He poured coffee into a tin mug and brought it over, crouching by her cot. Drink. Then tell me who's hunting you. Marin stared at the steam curling above the cup. Then, without thinking, she reached for the silver chain at her neck, a habit not defense, and held the pendant between her fingers. A small locket worn smooth by time. Cal's gaze locked onto it. She felt the shift in the room, a subtle tension, like the snap of a string you didn't know had been pulled taut. His eyes weren't on her anymore. They were on the locket. Where'd you get that? He asked, too quiet. Marin's hand faltered. It was my mother's. Passed down. What was her name? Eleanor. Eleanor Whitlock, before she married. The name hit him like a dropped stone in a still pond. He stood up, backed away. His boots thudded against the cabin floor. Marin watched him turn toward the table, as if bracing against a memory he hadn't asked for. She set the coffee aside. I suppose you deserve some truth, she said, her voice finding its edge. And so she told him. About the years locked in the house on Delaney Ridge. About the nights when the walls groaned under the weight of her stepfather's fury. About her mother, kind, fragile, fading like a pressed flower, and how one day she simply stopped being. They said she fell from a horse, Maureen said. But I saw the bruises. I heard her cry. Cal didn't move. Didn't turn. He married her after her first husband died, Marin continued. Inherited the land, the livestock, the silence. Then he made me marry Jeremiah. I was 16. He finally looked at her. There was no surprise in his face, only recognition. Of pain. Of pattern. I ran because they're coming back for the land. Jeremiah's alive. Changed his name. He wants the inheritance. And Harlan. He's helping him do it. Again. The name broke something. Cal walked to the desk in the corner. rifled through a small tin box, pulled out a folded document and laid it flat. His fingers trembled. Marin pushed herself upright, despite the ache. She leaned forward, saw the letterhead, Delaney Land Holdings. She looked up at him. "You already knew them," she said. Not a question. A statement. He nodded. "Harlan Delaney is my father." Marin froze. "He never claimed me. My mother worked for his family. He used her, left her. We moved west when I was 5. She never said his name, just called him the Storm. I only found out when I was grown." "And now?" Marin asked. His jaw tightened. "Now I race horses, alone." The silence pressed in, thick as winter wool. Marin reached for the locket again, but this time it felt colder. "You think I knew?" she whispered. "You think I came here to use you?" He said nothing. She stood too fast, too angry and staggered. He caught her before she hit the floor, steadying her with rough hands. They were close. Too close. Not in heat, but in history. "You think I'm playing some game," she hissed. "I don't know what to think," he replied. "You wear the same pendant my mother had. You show up with his name bleeding from your lips. You carry the same hate I do." Marin stared at him. Her breath caught. Not from fear. From the terrifying possibility that he might be right, and she didn't even know it. "Then let me ask you this," she said. "If I'm the daughter of the man who broke your mother, does that make me his sin?" Cal didn't answer. Outside, the wind howled low against the walls of the cabin, like some ancient animal moaning in its sleep. Maureen pulled away, sat back on the cot. Her hands trembled. He looked down at her, not with suspicion now, but with the weariness of a man who'd been holding on to rage so long he no longer knew what he'd be without it. "I don't trust Easy," he said. She met his eyes. "Neither do I." Maureen awoke to that low hum of the prairie and summer cicadas, droning in the tall grass, and a breeze so soft it might have been imagined. Inside Cal's cabin, heat pooled around the stove. He leaned over a rough-hewn table, smoothing out a well-worn leather satchel that hadn't held anything more dangerous than oats until now. Jeremiah Delaney arrived like a storm born on ash. Tall, calm, his clothes clean, his smile slow burn, charming. He crossed the threshold without knocking. Marin's breath hitched. He carried papers stamped with county seals, legal ink, and promises snarled in his voice. Behind him trailed the unspoken weight of Harlan Delaney's influence. Sheriff's promises, town council whispers, laws bent before there were courts to straighten them. She stayed silent, arm wrapped around her ribs. Her gaze dropped to her lap, folded hands trembling like horses on the run. "Marin," he said, nodding, like they'd last seen each other over Sunday supper. "Didn't expect to find you in his company." Cal stood just a step behind her, his presence like a loaded rifle, not drawn, but far from idle. "You've got a way of showing up where you're not wanted," Marin replied, voice low, steady. Jeremiah grinned. "Now that hurts." He stepped farther in, glancing at Cal, but speaking only to her. "I came with papers. You'll want to see them. Legal, certified. The land's future is being decided, and you're, what do the lawyers call it, a party of interest." Marin's hand tensed on the edge of the table. "You left," she said. "You disappeared. 6 years. No word, no burial. Just gone." "I was gone for 6 years," he continued, tone calculating as dust. "But things never left me. The land, the family name, and now you. You think you can keep Cal safe and still hold on to this?" He held up a gloved finger. "Do you know what that looks like?" Tainted, the cabin pulsed with that question. It held too much that wasn't hers, tangled threads of blood and claim and desire. Cal stepped forward, though he didn't draw. His flank brushed Marin's shoulder. She closed her eyes, acutely aware of distance and closeness in the same breath. Cal's voice was flat, brittle. "She's not your property," he said. "She's not a ledger entry. Jeremiah's eyes narrowed. Then I'll make her worth more dead than alive. You should know how that feels, Cal. Outside, a horse pawed the ground, a distant hollow drum of hooves. In that second, everything teetered. Jeremiah tilted his head, mock pity in his eyes. You know how it goes. The law doesn't care about feelings, Marin. You should have learned that from your dear stepfather. And besides, he turned to Cal now. If you're placing your bets on this one, you may want to check his past before you build him a future. Cal's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Jeremiah laid the papers on the table like a dealer placing his final card. I'll be in Beach Hollow until Monday. Think it over. Or don't. Makes no difference to me. He tapped the folder. This is just the beginning. He turned and left without another word, his boots leaving no mark on the worn floorboards, like a ghost trained in law. Days later, trouble slithered closer in the guise of law. Sheriff Hale, once indifferent, received an anonymous complaint. Cal Jarrett, convicted gunman, with a discharge paper older than your father's belt buckle. Jeremiah had whispered reminders. Even men with clean faces wear pasts beneath their skin. Hale sat across his desk from Cal lawnmower, sun beating through windows too small to matter. He slid the envelope across wood grain, so worn it bled with memory. Cal clutched it like a relic found in the dirt. He'd fought that record once, won a reprieve, rebuilt his life, one gentle sunrise at a time. The sheriff's eyes flicked past the envelope, past the man sitting in folds of regret. The law could lean either way tonight, and Jeremiah dangled that choice like a gutting promise council seat in exchange for cooperation. Cal did not answer. He simply stared into the envelope as if it was a grave his. The days that followed were too ceaseless, too still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Marin went walking one evening out toward the southern field. The grass swayed knee-high, the sun clinging to the edge of the horizon, bleeding gold into everything. Then she heard it. Not a bird, not a breeze, a shift. She turned just in time to see Cal barreling down the path behind her. "Get down!" he shouted. Gunfire tore through the field. Two men emerged from the grass, faces wrapped in cloth, pistols drawn. Cal moved like instinct, sharp, direct. One shot fired, then another. One man collapsed. The other stumbled, raised his hands. "Don't shoot," he cried. "I've got something. I have proof of Jeremiah's crimes. I stole it from his study. If I hand it over to you, will you spare me?" Cal rushed him, yanked the man's coat open. Inside, a folded letter. The man trembled. It was Jeremiah. "He hired us to scare you into giving up. But if things went bad, I needed to keep the evidence too." Cal glanced at Marie, then slowly unfolded the letter. Ink smeared but legible. Jeremiah's handwriting. A confession veiled as correspondence about a marriage before Marin, a wife still alive in Colorado. Legal names, bank accounts, a duplicate identity used to claim inheritance under false pretenses. Fraud, plain and unvarnished. Cal let the man go with a shove. Marin stepped closer. This is enough, isn't it?" He looked at her, and for once there was no doubt in his eyes. "It's a beginning." Late that night, Amity Cho arrived carrying her subtle strength like a lantern in this darkness. She pressed into Marin's hands a yellowing folder. "You should have seen his face when I brought this out of the attic," she said softly. Recorded letters, claims in 2 names. Jeremiah's pen dripped with lies like ink with acid. Marin listened, heart thudding beneath her bones. The letters lay between them, one from Jeremiah to his Colorado bride, another from the lawyer who drew the papers confirming he never legally divorced her. Amity nodded. "He used your name, used your land, but he forgot to burn what he left behind." Marin's breath caught. Outside, dawn hissed through the blinds, a new promise wrapped in cold light. The courthouse of Beach Hollow was not grand. It was a squat 2-story building of weathered brick, its windows streaked with dust and sun-bleached curtains. Yet on that day, It felt like the walls held the weight of nations. People crowded in, drawn by rumor, by whispers of scandal, by the promise that the Delaney name might finally break in public view. Marin sat at the front table, her palms flat against wood gouged with decades of restless fists. Her heart beat so loud she thought the whole room could hear. It had been 6 years since Jeremiah vanished, 6 years since she had worn the title of widow. And now she had come not to beg, but to demand the marriage voided, the inheritance restored, and her name freed from his. The judge, a heavy-set man with a drooping mustache, adjusted his spectacles and glanced at the docket. Case of Marin Delaney versus Jeremiah Delaney, he announced. Petition to dissolve marital claim on grounds of desertion and fraudulent concealment. All parties present. Jeremiah stood across from her, polished as ever. He gave a shallow bow, as if this were theater, not trial. Harlan Delaney, her stepfather, sat beside him, older now, his beard gone gray, but his eyes still sharp as barbed wire. He leaned on a cane that looked more like a weapon than a support. Marin forced herself not to look away. Every part of her body told her to shrink, to fold into invisibility. But she straightened, her chin high. She was not 17 anymore. Her lawyer rose, a young man with ink-stained cuffs. Your Honor, my client petitions for recognition that Jeremiah Delaney abandoned her for a period exceeding 6 years, presumed dead by all accounts, and therefore the marriage is void under Kansas statute. Furthermore, evidence will be presented that Jeremiah entered into a separate marriage under a different identity, invalidating any claim he now makes. Gasps flickered through the gallery. Jeremiah smiled faintly, unbothered. When the judge turned to him, Jeremiah's voice poured smooth as molasses. Your Honor, the lady exaggerates. I traveled, yes. But absence does not dissolve vows. As for these allegations of another marriage, nothing but stories dug up by bitter tongues. The land is mine through union, and hers through sentiment. Sentiment fades. Law remains. Marin's throat burned. She wanted to shout that he had used her life like a pawn ticket, that he had made her a ghost in her own home. But she held her tongue. There would be a moment. The moment came when the judge asked, and what evidence supports the petitioner's claim? The doors opened. Cal Jarrett stepped inside. The room shifted with his presence. People whispered, some with recognition, others with suspicion. A man with a record, they said. A man who ought not to show his face in court. Yet here he was, boots heavy against the floorboards, shoulders squared not in arrogance but in resolve. He carried a packet of letters bound with twine. Marin's chest tightened. She hadn't asked him to come. He had been warned if he appeared, Jeremiah's allies would resurrect every charm, every scar on his past. But he came anyway. Your Honor, he said, voice low but steady. I submit this. The judge motioned him forward. Cal placed the letters on the bench. The judge read, eyes narrowing at the signatures, the ink, the notarizations. He turned a page, then another. Murmurs rippled like wind through prairie grass. These appears, the judge said slowly, to confirm a legal marriage between Jeremiah Delaney and one Clara Greaves of Colorado Springs. Dates overlay, which would render the subsequent marriage to the petitioner invalid. Jeremiah's composure cracked just for a second. His hand tightened on the back of the chair, knuckles whitening. It's a forgery, he spat. Conjured by the bastard son of that man. He jerked his head at Harlan. And suddenly all eyes turned to the sheriff. Sheriff Hale had been silent until then, standing near the back like a sentinel, uncertain which flag to salute. Sweat glistened on his brow. He knew what hung in the balance. For years he had owed Harlan Delaney a debt born of war, of favors exchanged in smoke-filled rooms, of silence purchased with blood. He had turned away when Eleanor Marin's mother appeared with bruises. He had written off whispers of cruelty as family matters. He had let it go on. But now, in this packed room, the truth clawed at him louder than the crowd. The judge's gaze cut to him. Sheriff, These claims of forgery, what say you? You have served this county long enough to know its men." Hale swallowed. He could side with power as he always had. Or he could finally choose the law he had sworn to. He straightened, voice graveled but clear. "They're no forgery. I've seen Jeremiah use those names. I covered for him once. I covered for Harlan too. I was wrong." The room erupted, shouts, gasps. Harlan slammed his cane against the floor, rising to his full bitter height. "You owe me, Hale," he roared. "You think you can wash it off now, after all these years?" But Hale did not flinch. A debt to a man don't outweigh the debt to the law. Not anymore. The judge's gavel hammered down. "Order, order in this court." The decision was not long in coming. The letters, the sheriff's testimony, the record of absence altogether formed a wall Jeremiah could not scale. "Jeremiah Delaney," the judge declared, "your claim to this estate is null. The marriage to Marin Whitlock Delaney is void on grounds of prior union and fraudulent concealment. Furthermore, the court recognizes probable cause in charges of bigamy, fraud, and conspiracy. Sheriff, place him under arrest." The gallery roared like a storm. Jeremiah tried to lunge, but deputies seized him, twisting his arms behind his back. "And you, Harlan Delaney," the judge added, voice like iron, stand accused of aiding and abetting, and of long-standing abuse shielded by corruption. You will face trial as well." The old man's face turned a color between rage and fear. For the first time, Marin saw him as less than invincible. Just a tired soldier who had built his kingdom on bones and lies. She exhaled a breath she had held for years. The gavel struck again. The land reverts to Maureen Delaney, rightful heir. The courtroom seemed to tilt. Applause broke from some corners, silence from others. But in Maureen's chest there was no triumph, only a heavy release like shackles falling away. Cal stood at the seat, eyes steady on her. She wanted to go to him, but her legs refused. Instead, she sat hands folded, tears unshed, and let the truth settle. For the first time, her name was hers. The house at Beach Hollow did not look like a home anymore. To Marin, it had never truly been one. Its windows sagged with age, its porch boards warped by decades of storms, but it still stood stubborn, like a scar, refusing to fade. This was where her mother had wasted away, beneath Harlan's iron rule. This was where Marin had been caged like livestock, forced into vows with a man who vanished only to return with chains of paper and lies. Now, after the trial, after the verdict, the keys to this hollow kingdom lay in her palm. The court had called it an inheritance. Marin called it a wound. The late afternoon sun lay heavy on the prairie gold, sliding toward copper. Marin walked the yard slowly, her boots crunching over dry grass. Every step stirred up memories, the nights she pressed her ear against the floorboards, listening to her mother weep. The mornings she scrubbed blood from linens told it was her duty. The day she first understood that walls could be prisons even when the door was left unlocked. She paused at the threshold. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing rooms shrouded in dust and shadow. The air smelled of mildew and abandonment, yet underneath lingered something sharper, like old iron, like fear preserved in wood. Cal stood a pace behind her, silent. He had ridden with her here without asking why. He had watched her dismount, her hands trembling not from weakness, but from resolve. And now he watched, still, his presence steady as a fence post in shifting winds. Inside, the house whispered. Maureen moved through the kitchen, running her hand along the counter, scarred by knives and bottles. She climbed the stairs, the wood groaning beneath her, until she reached the room that once belonged to her mother. Curtains shredded by years of neglect fluttered weakly at the window. A cracked mirror leaned against the wall, its surface mottled, reflecting her in fragments. She stood there a long time, staring at her reflection, at a woman, not yet old, but carved by years of silence. In the shards of glass, she saw her mother's eyes, Her own shoulders stooped beneath invisible weight. And she knew then what she had to do. When she came back down, she carried an oil lamp. Her hands were steady now. Cal's gaze followed her, unreadable but unwavering. He did not ask. He seemed to know. Maren set the lamp on the floor of the front room. For a moment, she hesitated, her thumb brushing the warm glass. Fire had nearly taken her once, before she had fled through smoke and flame the night she escaped. But this was different. This time she was not running from fire. She was calling it. She struck the match. The flame caught with a hiss, small at first, then bold. It licked at the wall, at the curtains, at the memories, embalmed in timber and plaster. Heat swelled, smoke rose, and the house began to groan, as though it knew its sentence had come due. Maureen stepped back, her face illuminated by the blaze. She did not cry. She did not smile. She simply watched as years of captivity turned to cinders. Beside her, Cal stood firm. He did not reach for her hand, though it was near. He let the fire be her witness, her confessor, her final tzorich. He understood this was not revenge. It was re-ritual, a cleansing. The flames climbed higher, spilling out of windows, painting the twilight sky in orange and black. Sparks carried on the wind like restless souls finally released. Maren breathed in the smoke, not choking this time, not afraid, but tasting freedom in its bitter edge. When the roof collapsed with a roar, she closed her eyes. Hours later, when the last beam had fallen and the fire had eaten its fills, only embers remained, red coals glowing faint beneath a veil of ash. The land was bare now, stripped of walls, stripped of secrets. Maren turned her back on the ruin. She carried no relic, no keepsake. The past would not travel with her. Cal brought the horse forward, a tall chestnut, with a white blaze down its nose. Together, they had named it Liberty. Maren laid a hand on its mane, feeling the warmth of living muscle, the steadiness of breath, something that could carry her not into the past, but away from it. They rode out from Beach Hollow, with nothing but a saddlebag of essentials, their shadows long in the falling dusk. Behind them, the smoke trailed like a torn flag, and ahead stretched the open land, raw and unclaimed. Before they reached the ridge, Maureen turned once more. The blackened skeleton of the house was nearly invisible now against the horizon. It looked small, powerless. She whispered, barely audible over the hoofbeats, "It ends here." Amity Cho was waiting at the edge of town when they passed. She had insisted on seeing Maureen one last time before the road carried her away. Her hair was grayer than ever, her back slightly bent, but her eyes sharp, kind, relentless, held fast. She embraced Maren, and for the first time, Maren let herself lean into another's arms without fear. Amity spoke softly, words meant only for her. Not every woman who escapes a marriage finds freedom. But you, child, you chose freedom the right way. Maren closed her eyes. In that moment, amid the fading smoke and the endless prairie, she felt the truth settle into her bones. Freedom was not granted. It was taken, claimed, lit, like a match in the hollow of her own hand. The cabin was small, barely more than 4 walls of pine, and a roof that creaked under the mountain wind. Yet for Maureen, it was the first place that felt untouched by the shadows of Delaney blood. The air was crisp with pine resin, carrying the hush of a nearby creek, tumbling over stones. The world outside stretched in quiet miles of wilderness land, unmarked by fences or court claims. She stood on the porch as the sun dipped low, painting the ridges in amber and violet. The boards beneath her feet smelled fresh-cut Cal's handiwork over the past weeks. Her hands cradled a notebook, worn leather edges, frayed pages stained with her mother's handwriting, a relic of the woman who had not lived to see freedom. Maren opened to the first blank page. Her breath caught. How many times had she been told her story by others? A widow, a runaway, a possession. Words forced upon her like shackles. But here in the hush of the mountains, the page was hers. The pen trembled between her fingers, then steadied. She wrote, "Widow is only what they chose to call me. But I will choose my own name." The ink sank into the paper stark against the pale fibers. She read it once, twice. A weight lifted, subtle but undeniable. It was not a declaration to a court, nor a plea to men in power. It was a truth whispered to the wilderness, to the setting sun, to her own heart. Behind her, the cabin door opened with a groan. Footsteps measured, deliberate, crossed the boards. Marin did not turn until the shadow stretched beside hers. Cal stood there, broad-shouldered in the fading light. In his hand something small caught the fire of the schema, a ring, silver, unpolished, cut, plain and honest. On the inner band just one word had been carved with a sure hand: begin. He held it not as a prize, not as a claim, but as an offering. His voice, low and roughened by years of dust and silence, broke the still air. "Marin." She turned fully, her notebook pressed against her chest. "You don't have to start again alone," he said. His gaze did not waver, though she could see the storm of doubt beneath. Let me help write the chapters that come after. Not as your keeper, not as your savior, just as a man who wants to walk beside you." And then, as if the weight of honesty demanded it, he sank to one knee. The grass, wet with spring, bent under him. He lifted the ring as though it was both heavy and fragile. "Marin Delaney." He whispered her name, tasting different in his mouth, no longer bound to the men who had tarnished it. "Give me the chance to make it mean something new. Will you let me? Will you take me with you into whatever comes?" The world held still. The sun seemed to pause at the edge of the ridge. Even the creek quieted in her ears as though waiting. Marin's throat tightened, but her lips curved despite the tears gathering. A laugh, small and sudden, broke free, half sob, half joy. "Cal." She pressed her hand to her mouth, the notebook slipping against her dress. Tears spilled down warm against the cool mountain air. "Yes." The word trembled, then grew. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Cal closed his eyes, as if the answer was a balm he had not dared hope for. He slid the ring onto her finger, rough silver against skins, softened by ink and labor. It fit imperfectly, but truth often did. Marin looked down at it, at the word etched within, begin. The mountain breeze lifted her hair, carrying the smoke of the old life far away. And for the first time the name she bore, the story she carried, belonged entirely to her. Looking back on Marin's journey, I believe what lingers is not the trials or the cunning villains, but the long silence she carried within herself. In the West, full of dust and gun smoke, we are used to stories of men who settle everything with a revolver. But Marin did not win by violence. She endured, she spoke, she chose, and in the end, she let go of what the world called wealth in order to keep her dignity. The beauty of her story lies in this: freedom was never granted by others, nor written into the court's decrees. It was born in the moment she named herself anew. And Cal, he was no savior, no shining hero. He was proof that even a man scarred by the past can choose a decent road forward. In a West so often remembered for its cruelty and its injustice, it is such quiet acts of courage that deserve to be called legend.